Okay, and I'm going to restart the stream and see what happens here. See if it's going to give me an encoding overload again.
Yeah, that's sort of what happened last time.
If it does, I'll just stop the stream and we'll wind up uploading the video. How does that sound?
Good enough for me. Already
That's
recording.
good, Eddie.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to have to do all over again. Okay, forget the stream. All right.
We have the people.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I mean, I mostly came up with this topic because I'm pretty excited to have a conversation on Sunday with you and Dave and Cassidy. That conversation that's mostly focused on ecumenism in America between the different denominations. I was very happy about that idea from Nathan.
Yeah, it was a good idea. It was indeed. I don't know where he is on all those things.
I think
He's Orthodox, right?
Yeah, Nathan, I think is Orthodox.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, so, but I'm excited because I sort of like I've talked to at least. I mean, I've talked to you a lot, but I've also talked to David a decent amount, and same with Cassidy. I sort of I'm very excited because I'm very comfortable. So yeah.
And Cassidy is what?
She's sort of in the process of figuring out. I mean, she's mostly like leaning towards Orthodox.
Gotcha.
She grew up Protestant, so that's her background. I don't know what denomination precisely. I think it was some sort of evangelical, but that's just such a big blanket.
Right.
Just like evangelical. There you go. It's like either evangelical or you got like more conservative Protestant. So.
Yeah. Well, guess what? It's such a big blanket that it also covers Catholicism too. Because if you take the command to go and make disciples, that's technically evangelical right there.
Yeah.
Like
I mean,
that's the basis of it. So if you take the Great Commission seriously, then you might as well just consider yourself evangelical, whether you're Catholic or not.
oh yeah, no, for sure. But I mean, the differences will manifest in services and liturgy and theology.
Right.
Obviously, I mean, more or less, most Christians are, to some extent, I mean, it depends on where you are, but there's always going to be some sort of evangelism that they bring to the table. Like, I mean, Protestants usually are we're very evangelical. We're always going to be going out and talking to people, and then Orthodox, I think, would be more on the other side of we'll just hang out in our little niche and do some chants on the mountain. So, and then Catholics are usually somewhere in between. It depends on the Catholic.
But is it possible for a Christian church to be non-evangelical in the sense you are using, Charlie?
Yes, there are some universalist churches that are not very evangelical, and there's also some that are Calvinists that are not very evangelical because they are predestination. So it doesn't matter if you were to go out and try to make disciples, like that's up to God. That's already done. It's already been written. So there's that too.
Interesting. So there are some Christians churches then who doesn't fit under the umbrella. That's interesting.
I feel like the Jewish are at least evangelical, but I mean that they're not even Christian, but in a sense they don't even care who you are. They're like, whatever, you're more or less fine most of the time. So
Yeah, I mean they take it to the next level though. They are like, we don't want you to convert.
yeah.
Like seriously, because there are so many things that they have to follow under Judaism that they're like, no way. Like just don't even try.
You don't even you just don't have to, basically.
Right. They're like, look, here's some basic stuff. Follow this. Come to synagogue. Please do not convert, because then it's going to be like, we're going to essentially throw the law book at you. So please don't convert.
Yeah, I think it depends on the person. I wouldn't say they would say please don't, but they would say you don't have to. It's not necessity.
Right.
And I mean, sort of back to the topic, I think the estuary is besides a great place to have conversation for people outside of a religious background or religious practice. I think it's also great for people inside, but sort of separate denominationally, because it's based off mostly diversity of thought and having conversations that put that at the pinnacle of values, I guess.
Right. And that's, for the most part, I would say that's what we have with the Discord already, is that is a form of estuary, because we have lots of people there.
Oh yeah, I mean it basically is one. It already is one. It's just I think Paul is focused on how do you make it real in the non-digital space, in the physical space, and that's obviously much harder. And we've sort of discussed that a bit. I think sort of the first time we hit on that, and but it's always, I just like the idea that it would be a good place to start with ecumenism. And I think actually ecumenical discussions will become easier as time goes on. Just because I feel like with like so much deconstruction happening between people, there will be just less, in a sense, Christians, but it'll level out so that the serious ones are really close together, and then we have an easier time conversing since there's less of us, but we're also very, hopefully knowledgeable. And then there's the people that are just dissolving out, and that's some of my thoughts on that.
No, I get what you're saying, and it's like, okay, so we're going to have to broach the topic again of making it real outside of the digital space, and like why that's so difficult.
Yeah.
And so the only way I know to describe this is to go back to Moses, right? For all intents and purposes, Moses was Israel's God in the flesh. So what happens when Moses goes onto the mountain for 40 days to actually converse with God? Well, they build an idol and they begin to worship it because they've taken that away. So the reason we have such a tough time marketing this is because it's abstract ideas. There's nothing like the reason Paul could do it so easily is because he can say that person, and I can point to Jordan Peterson and say, okay, we're calling it a Jordan Peterson meetup, right? Something real, physical, tangible. It's a person. Now, if you were to take all of Peterson's ideas and say, oh, we're just going to talk about all these ideas, people are like, okay. But, there's nothing that makes it concrete instead of fluid. And that's kind of what we're butting up against.
Yeah, it's both the figurehead issue and the metaphorical language issue.
Yeah.
And of course, well, I think, specifically ecumenical discussions would, if, let's say, an estuary, let's not worry about all of those potholes that establishing an estuary in a non-digital space would have. If an estuary is successfully created, I think the ecumenical discussions would be very possible solely because, there's the estuary, and also and then I guess you're just able to converse easier, and I think that sort of happens on the Discord.
Can I go a little bit back? Because I'm wondering, what do you mean by creating a successful one?
Well, the issue that estuary has, so I sort of Charlie mentioned the figurehead issue. Basically, is the reason why Paul was able to create the reason sort of that the Discord was made was so that the in-person meetup groups could chat online basically, and then but they had the figurehead of Jordan Peterson. So the figurehead issue is basically, so when you have a figurehead, you're able to talk around and about their ideas. So if you have a Jordan Peterson meetup group, you're going to talk about Jordan Peterson. But then how do you make a meetup group in a sense without a specific group of ideas that you want to discuss? So like a Bible study group, it's really easy. You just say, oh, we're going to study these different verses and we're going to be fine. And during these days, during this time, and these are sort of the ideas that we're going to talk about. And so you have either a figurehead or an idea group, basically. And then, so there's many reasons why I think an estuary can fail. There's the metaphorical language, so it's sort of abstract. And then there's also just the physical space, right? So to facilitate conversations, you have to have the environment in a sense has to be right. And like it would be hard to get people to come to a place, like let's say I was hosting something at my local church. Most people aren't, like most normal people or people who aren't Catholic aren't going to just walk into a Catholic church and be like, all right, I'm going to talk about, my atheism. Like, no, that's not going to happen. Like that's not what people would do. And so that's sort of like the physical space issue. And so like, how do you get the right space? So those are like a couple of my ideas of why it would fail. So to create a successful one would be to have solved the figurehead issue, so have the right group of ideas, to have, in a sense, successfully explained the metaphorical language, and then also have the right physical space. That was a bit of a word salad.
Yes, thanks for the explanation. I just just thinking about what you're saying is like, are we making it a little bit maybe too complex? Like that we have, I mean, like with the Jordan Peterson thing, I don't think that Jordan Peterson or the people around have like so many thoughts about how we're gonna create something. I think it's going more with the flow, and I think maybe we should more imitate it. Like we have this place here, what we're doing now, and a Discord. Can we do that on a personal level, and maybe from there out grow something more organically,
Hmm.
like a combination of things?
Yeah, I think that could be true. And I
So you touched on it, and that's what I'm doing here, right? It's like I all the conversations that Paul had leading up to this, I'm like, okay, that's great. And you guys just keep talking. But let's actually just get out and do something and see if it works. Right. And then it's okay, great, this thing. But now how is it going to be more organic in the physical space? Well, that's going to require everyone that wants to do it actually getting out and doing it. Like,
oh yeah.
because we can sit around and talk about it all day long and talk about how it might fail, how it might not fail, but we don't know until we get out and try it.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to. I've been thinking about, you know, every once in a while, sort of in my free brain time, about how I could set this up in person. And I mean, so I'm I'm not on campus, but I'm a student at University of Maine, and so um, that there's an added benefit, but also an added risk to it. So like the risk is you could have a flaming potato that just smashes through the estuary and just destroys everything because they're just angry or something or resentful, and they don't want to have conversation, or honest conversation. And the issue is that you have to have the right culture, I think, in the first couple of meetings so that it gets in that groove and it sort of self maintains itself uh, for the next coming times. And so, but the benefit is that you have a lot of people who should be interested in thoughtful conversation on a
Right.
college. So
Yeah,
there's that benefit, but there's also that added risk of someone who maybe, not the right person comes in and just destroys it.
I think you are touching there on a good point, like the creating a culture of a tradition or whatever you call it. Like, do we know how we can communicate with each other? And that is something maybe we need to rethink or relearn how we can have good conversations.
Yeah. And that's sort of why it was easy for Jordan Peterson meetups to happen, is not necessarily the ideas, but the culture. So Jordan Peterson sort of overtly expressed his desire to have long form conversations with people. And that, I think, was more or less the culture that I'm guessing was brought to Peterson meetups. I've never been to one, but I'm guessing that's sort of what happened.
Yeah, and talking to Joey and Tyler, that's kind of how it went.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know that still doesn't solve our figurehead problem, but I think it's got to be plural. It's got to be figureheads.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you can point to a whole lot of different people and say, here's all the conversations that were happening. This is
Mm-hmm.
what we're trying to foster. And then I think people get a better idea of it, right? Like if you're saying, I want to have Jordan Peterson, Rogan, Paul Vanderklay type discussions, people are like, oh, well, I know at least 2 out of 3 of those people. So,
Mm-hmm.
and no, I don't mean I want to have discussions about DMT all the time. Just,
Have you tried DMT? um,
uh,
yeah, I that's a possible solution. Sort of spreading it across. And
Well, I think that's Paul's idea, right?
mhm.
Like that's how he's wanting to solve the figurehead problem. Is he saying no, no, no? We have to spread it across multiple figureheads so that we can say these ideas.
Yeah, that's, I like that. um, I also liked. I think when we first talked, Kevin was here in the first one where we sort of talked about the practicalities. Um, and one of his ideas was sort of just having like a conversation table and just like setting something up and being like, I'll talk to you about anything. Sort of like have coffee or something like there, and sit down.
Yeah.
Let's talk about anything. But I think going back to the ecumenical side of this, um, I think it would also, once it's set up, it would bring in a range of different people. Um, like I don't think we have any Coptic Orthodox or like those sort of like smaller, very not different, but I guess you could maybe say fringe. They're just not all out there. So you could bring more to the table in a sense.
Right. But the question is, how do we get there?
Okay.
So, I mean, I think we do a pretty good job on the Discord of just like, that's a place where it doesn't matter where you line up on that spectrum. You're just there to discuss ideas and it's fine.
Oh yeah.
Throw it all out there, you know?
Yeah, and that's sort of why I'm excited to have the conversation on Sunday.
Me too. I like the interfaith conversations like that, and it was a good idea on Nathan's part.
Oh yeah.
Now, part of me thinks maybe he wants to see like a debate/argument thing go on, and
I don't think so. I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised if he wanted. I don't think that's in this. That's not really in the spirit of. I think he would have framed it differently, because it's not really in the spirit of an estuary to have very upfront, uh, aggressive arguments. It's more like you can have them, in the forum, but they don't. They're not as often as the normal conversation.
okay, maybe he's hoping one will organically sprout out because he seemed more than okay with mine and Jacob's debate. He was all good with that. He's like, no, keep going. This is good. I didn't come here to listen to people agree with one another.
When did that? I don't remember that.
I don't remember either. It was pretty far back.
Right.
Wait, you talking about the debate Jacob and I had, or him saying that?
Well, I know you guys just have talked and babbled a bunch, so I haven't really followed it very closely. I stopped months ago.
Yeah, that's kind of up to you whether you want to follow that or not.
Do you think those discussions in sometimes in more terms of lack of agreement are fruitful for the estuary?
Yes, I do. If the debate is not heated and you're not calling each other names and you're not like all Catholics are bloodthirsty cannibals. Like this, if you're not saying that, fine. Like seriously, if it's going to be a debate and it's not going to get heated and it's just people expressing ideas, I do think that's good. And it's not always because of the two people debating, right? Because the two people debating may never change their mind at all. But all the people sitting around might hear some things that they've never heard before. It makes the two parties dig a little bit deeper into their theology and why they believe it. And then the other ones sitting around are like, oh, I've never considered that. So, like, the whole time I was debating back and forth with Jacob, it was less about me and him and more about who else might be seeing it. Because if he had good points, I wanted people to see that and be like, oh, I've never considered that before. So I do think it can be fruitful as long as both parties engaging in it are engaging in the right spirit of not trying to win the debate.
Yeah, if it's a good faith conversation, I think would be sort of the PVK terminology. You can
Yeah,
have a good faith argument.
yeah, you can, and you can just say, "Oh no, I disagree with you, and here's why." And then if they push back, you can say, "Well, I still disagree, and here's another reason why." Like that's, I think Americans see debate as like political debates before the presidential election, right? Well, that's not a debate.
Yeah.
A good debate is just that. It's like, no, I disagree with you, and here's why. And it's that back and forth, that both people are doing it, not trying to win, but trying to give an account for why they think what they think.
Yeah. The tone or emotional charge wouldn't change much from the conversation that we're having right now.
No.
Like, it would change in the sense that, oh, I have this slight disagreement, but it's not going to be like, oh, I'm going to try and blow this person to smithereens. Like, that's not what I'm doing right now, and that's not how it would ever really be.
Yeah, and that's one thing that PVK is really good at. Like he can have a debate with you and you don't think it's a debate. Like whatever, one of his latest videos, he did a podcast with that nice young, I say young, a nice college kid that's over there in California. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, I watched that one.
Think
So
so.
when the whole thing about he says, well, there's biological reasons why you wouldn't have sex with your sister, and then he's like, yeah, but what if they were really careful, and what about this, and what, and like, so he's actually pushing back on him. He's debating him a little bit, saying, no, I disagree with your conclusion, but he never makes it sound like he's talking down to him or just overtly disagreeing with him. He's just asking questions.
Yeah.
But you hear in his voice, like, no, I disagree with your conclusion there, buddy.
Yeah, that's also that same thing sort of happened. I think it was, I don't know how much farther along in the pod or discussion, but he brought up a verse by the Gospel or of Thomas, and so PDK was like, "Oh, I'm not familiar with that," and then he sort of he doesn't immediately jump to, "Oh, that's heretical and bad." He sort of like eventually gets to that point. He doesn't ever really say it's bad. He just says, "Oh, that's you know, oh, I'm just not familiar with that because it's from a Gnostic gospel," and then he sort of explains what that is.
Right. I loved how he did that. He's like, I'm not familiar with that. And then you hear clicky keyboard and he's like,
Yeah,
oh, that's from the Gospel of Thomas.
yeah,
But like he never calls it out like, why would you say why would you be talking about Gospel of Thomas when we're talking about the Bible?
yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where you would get that with some other people. But he's just like, oh, that's why I'm not familiar with it. And then just like it never happened.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, I do think that given the right circumstances, you can have debate about it as long as both people are doing so from a good position.
Yeah, I think the having ecumenical disagreements would be important for the estuary, and having some, obviously there would have to be disagreement, and that's why they would be having the disagreements in the first place. So I think that would be necessary. You have to have, you just have to have the right balance of argument and discussion, and then sort of normal life discussion and stuff.
Yeah, you have to be able to balance that out. But yeah, I mean, it's necessary and it's going to happen anyhow, because if you have that many different people from different denominations or different well, you can't even say Protestants because that's just such a large umbrella that it's like, even if you had a Pentecostal and a Baptist, like they're going to disagree for sure. Like those disagreements are there. Yeah, and they've been there for a long time. So it's like, okay, fine. Have your disagreements, just do it in good faith. It's like Catholics and Orthodox are always going to disagree about a whole host of different things. And you might find them in agreement about Lutherans. And that's, but it's,
I think we agree probably more than we disagree on things, just in general, I'd say. Maybe, but depends.
well, if you had your way about it, you guys would all be in agreement because you'd have the double barrel holy church. So
that's true. We get the Hagia Sophia and Notre Dame Cathedral.
You're like, we're just gonna slap these back together, okay?
And then we'll have Jordan Peterson make a speech and have a lobster.
Well, while you're at it, go rebuild Solomon's temple too, and that way y'all can all be one unit again.
Well, the point is to eventually just be perfectly together.
Yeah.
And then the new Earth came and everything is gone.
Then America and everything will be united under beautiful Christendom.
I'm beginning to think it's just an American problem because, we're just so disagreeable about everything. That honestly, that's why there's so many schisms between all of it. It's like we're just too disagreeable to even have a European one church style system. We're just like, no.
Yeah, and I guess, well, some of it started, I'm guessing, before America was colonized, but I think the American spirit, I guess, of what you're sort of talking about definitely increased the amount of divisions, and
Oh yeah.
we want to divide and go somewhere else.
Well, it used to be that a schism was such a huge deal, and now it's not anymore. It's like, oh, this is just bound to happen. Right? Like we haven't seen a whole lot of new churches crop up, but you've seen a whole lot in the past. It's like this, part of that is the American spirit of just like, I just like this thing, so we're going to go start our own church. It's like, because of that one thing, like, okay.
Yeah,
like if you were to say, okay, Catholics and EO, that split, massive, huge deal, right? that was like, these are doctrine differences that are not going to be resolved anytime soon. So the split had to happen. All right. And like, that's bad. But then the later down the line you get, it's like, oh, so you don't want to be Baptist. You want to start the First Baptist Church because of this one little thing. Oh, and now we have to start the Second Baptist Church because the First Baptist Church says you shouldn't drink alcohol. So then we have the Second Baptist. And it's like, the schisms get more and more stupid the further you go down the line. It's not like this is such a doctrine difference that we can't resolve. But that's got to the point where we can't, it seems like we can't have ecumenical discussions across different faiths. It's like people want to seem like that gap is too wide to bridge. And it's like, really? Is it?
Yeah, and I think it's like people often just want to be right. They don't want to, and then the conversations also generally come down to right versus wrong, and that's not how you should really have a disagreement. A healthy disagreement would be, okay, this is what I believe, this is what you believe, this is why I believe what I believe, and this is, and then you tell me why you believe what you believe, and then you could sort of go down the route of sort of like maybe the theological reasons for these things and progress.
And still walk away with the disagreement and that be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's also maybe people are obsessed with trying to solve issues right there and then, but
Right. It's like, well, in order for me to have any sort of relationship with you, you have to be in my tribe. It's like, no, that's absolutely not correct whatsoever. It's like, have your disagreements and be okay with it.
yep. Yeah. And I think I do think maybe it'll be easier down the line for sort of the reasons that I stated before. They're in a sense being um, less Christians and the less serious ones sort of get weeded out by modernity and post-modernity.
Right.
And I think also this is sort of like an age of information. And so we're all very obsessed with information. So there's the plus and negative of that. And in this case, the plus is we can learn more about different denominations easier. Like if I wanted to learn about something of Orthodox theology, like what do they take on this position, all I have to really do is go to Google. If it's an easier question, just be like, Google, give me the answer. And then like if it's harder, I have to, read a book or something. That's like the worst case scenario. Where before you'd have to like travel someplace, talk to
Right.
a rabbi or a priest and be like, what do you guys think about this? And then they might not know. And so that's already like a month gone in which I would already have the answer in maybe a minute.
But isn't this like something very important you are touching in? Like you can get the answer in 1 minute, but it's like from Google. But
That's true.
is it not much for, well, what's more important, getting the answer or getting to know the people in the process? Maybe there is a good reason why they don't know the answer. Maybe they never thought about it. So what we are doing is not trying to Google as much answers as we can, but having some meaningful conversation. And that sometimes means a little bit of slack and a little bit of time. And I think this fits very nice in that we are kind of used to think in categories and in box. So instead of having a conversation with Charlie or Andrew, I think I'll have a conversation with a Catholic or a Baptist. It's using category box that is on the abstract level very useful, but on the personal level, it doesn't make any sense to only use those categories, because a person is much more than only those things.
Yeah, and well, the negative of the information is that like I can Google in 1 second. Google always could be wrong about what I'm Googling, and also, as you bring up, the information era in a sense is able to it breaks us apart from each other. So we don't always have that personal relationship, which is important. And yeah, I agree with you on that. There's the negatives. There's a lot of negatives, I think. There's also lots of positives where we can learn a lot. Like I could find online free books like pretty easily for some topic that I want to learn about, and like that's really important and good. But then again, it's important to have both, and I think the estuary is a correct utilization of this information era that we're sort of in, where we have so much that we can grab at, but the estuary is a building of personal relationships as well, along with this increased amount of availability of information.
Well, okay, so I'll put it this way. I could Google, why is there a statue of Christ on the cross in a Catholic church, right? And it's going to return like a crap ton of results, and then I've got to filter through those and go, okay, now, like what are the most prominent voices, right? Because Google's SEO is going to be ran by money.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
People with a bad idea can pay more money to have their opinion put at the top.
Yeah, that's the problem with all this information.
But I'm a Discord chat away of asking Andrew, hey, why is this the case? Right? Yep. So much easier for me to have that personal relationship with you. And then I have that question. I'm like, hey, why do you think this is the case? I know plenty of Orthodox people now. I can just be like, hey, well, what's up with this? Like over the years, I've built relationships with people of other faiths, and I can just ask them a question like that. And for me, I like that better, because when I get an answer from them, it's not a book answer, but it's this is why I believe this to be true.
Yeah.
It's like, great. I would much rather have that answer than the book answer.
No, I like that one more. I like it more too. I'm just sort of saying this is like the pro. There's also the negative of getting really bad answers. And then there's the estuary, which is able, I think, to combine them both. Because like you could say, hey, I Googled this. Is this right? Like this seems a bit fishy. Like I don't think that's sort of what the Orthodox would believe. Like I didn't think that. Like I thought you guys did like more intense fasting during Lent. What's the deal with this? And then you can that sort of sparks the conversation as well.
Right. It gives you checks and balances.
Yeah, it gives you
can
both.
Say like, oh, I read this, but that doesn't seem right. What do what do you think about it? And then that gives the opportunity for that conversation to open up. And you probably learn 2 or 3 new things that you didn't get from reading about that topic.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, oh, I see. Okay. So yeah, it's way better if you can have the both and.
Yep. It's always better. It's always better to have both and.
So the best way then is to read together Google's answer and then discuss it.
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see like, okay, these are like, maybe these are some weird things that Google gave me. Which one's sort of the one that you guys follow or what you personally follow, and then you can sort of go from there. And I enjoy that. I mean, I think it's a great it's great that we have all this information at our fingertips. It's also very dangerous.
Very dangerous, because you can walk away thinking you know what the other person means or
Yeah.
what the other person's faith is, and you don't know.
Yeah, you walk away with ignorance and arrogance.
Right. And it's really hard to do, because maybe you've encountered 15 to 20 people that claim to be within that same faith, right? And maybe 19 out of the 20 have turned out to be bad. So what's the chance that you're going to take a risk on that 20th person not being like the other 19? Like, it's really difficult. Like, I noticed that in my debate with Jacob, is like, he had some preconceived notions about me because I say, oh, well, I'm Baptist. Well, here's all these preconceived notions. And then here's how all these Christian missionaries have treated me all my life. Right. And it's like all that bundled into one. And then it was like, so here's what I think about you. And it's like, but that's technically not correct.
Yeah, well, we all sometimes do that. And
Right. That's why I say it makes the ecumenical discussions a little bit more tricky to broach.
Yes, there are a little bit more assumptions of things other people believe or stand for, and in a way, it gives a good opportunity, because if you ask them in honesty, like, Charlie, do you think about X? Because I have heard or I read, like what we discussed before, and then just ask honestly if you live that out and practice it, instead of just assuming you have X, Y, and Z, and then just go to the next thing.
Right. And once he and I could get past that, then it was like, oh, okay. Because I saw myself doing that with him sometimes too, and being like, oh God, really? But then once I learned to get past that, it was like, oh, okay, well, we can have a much better conversation.
I think it's also good to sometimes see a little bit more kind of those disagreements, because other people can also learn from it how to engage with somebody if you are in the same position or in the same boat. Even I don't read all the content.
yeah,
I mean, sure, there's plenty of things that make it difficult, but if it wasn't difficult, then we wouldn't be trying to do it, right? So, I mean, yeah, and the biggest difficulty is it's other people. Like, that's our biggest problem as humans, is that other humans exist, and it's also the best thing.
Rich, you want to take a question?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep, I hear
Yes.
you.
Okay. Okay. This is Richard. It's just a question about. I guess this has already been covered endlessly, and I hate to rehash it, but it seems like when I was talking to Charlie last night, we were talking about trying to make estuary into trying to get more people in, have it a broader appeal. That's kind of, as evangelicals, that's our go-to position. Evangelize, get more people under the tent, play the music louder, shout louder, just get people to walk into the tent. So that's the first thing. But at the same time, there's a lot of work to be done. We could deepen the relationships with the people who are already in the estuary, try to build something by deepening the relationship. But also, there's a temptation for me to try to steer the conversation to more productive areas and try to find, grow the level of conversation up to where it's getting kind of a greater yield, a greater benefit, more productive areas, and just a place where, Vervaeke, they're trying to build a religion that's not a religion, and they can always steer the conversation back to, hey, let's keep building this religion that's not a religion. We're going to build that. We're going to build that, and they do have a direction that way. Any thoughts and comments on what I just said?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like a inward and upward, and I think that, I mean, I think it's just generally important to, I do think that actually generating the deeper conversation first will actually do the evangelizing itself if we're sort of talking in the estuary sense. I mean, I've also noticed that when looking and sort of reading through why people came back to different denominations such as Orthodox or Catholic, but that's a different, I'm going to try and keep this on the level of estuary itself. I think having the conversations first would do, like on the local level, if you're able to make the physical work, would then be able, by word of mouth, to progress and make it larger.
So in a way, we have all to invite one friend for the next meeting.
Well, no, see, and that's why I've liked these weekly, right? Because the only two people I can count in here that have been here since week 1 is me and Andrew. Like every other time, it's been other people scattered throughout, right? And I think for me, that's what makes it better, because I'm always getting to talk to people that I haven't talked to before. I mean, it's great having Andrew here every week, and I don't want him to like skip out a week ever. But,
Last line.
but I'm constantly getting to talk to new people, and I think that's probably the best part of an estuary is it's this it's the saltwater creatures and the freshwater creatures that would never exist in the same place, or not typically, and here they are. Like, okay, you might say, well, we all come from this one same Discord server, and that's fine. But how many of us have actually had deep, meaningful conversations with one another in the amount of time that we've been on that Discord? Like, okay, probably not that many, right? So,
Yeah,
and like the expanding out, I'm hoping that more, like I can post it on my YouTube channel and that's fine. But how many other people could we get to like link to it and be like, hey, check this out. Hey, like if we want to grow it, that's how we grow it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, both are important. I mean, it's, I mean, you can't just have the conversations and not try and get other people, but I think it's also the balance that you have to get the balance right. You can't just be focusing on getting people, but when they get there, they have crappy conversations or conversations just aren't lively and fruitful. But you also have to try and get people, and so you have to do both.
Yeah. I just worry about what Ravaki's. Well, it's his term, but I don't think he uses it the way I do. And combinatory explosion, right? I don't want it to grow so fast, point where it's garbage conversation because we've reached.
You broke up, Charlie.
Yes, he reached the point.
His computer exploded.
Well, this was interesting what Rich was bringing up, that Vervaeke has kind of a foundation, and maybe the estuary missed a foundation or a straightforward goal,
Yeah,
or something they can fall back on, like, because it's very easy. Okay, we are. I don't think they would say we are building a religion. Who isn't a religion? I think they would use a little slightly different terms.
Yeah. That's actually what you just said is, they have a foundation and it's easy for them because they already have the goals built in, right?
yeah,
Yeah, they have like 50 episodes about what's the problem, and now we're gonna fix this. In a
So that
way,
brings us back to the ecumenical, because everybody's coming from a different perspective. Or what's the goals of something that's completely ecumenical and completely broad and is it occupies as much space. It doesn't even have a center almost, right?
yeah,
What are the goals of that completely ecumenical space? Well, that's a problem. So in a way, I have a tendency to make people less ecumenical, to sort of get people focused on, just take a little chunk out of them and get them chip down the unformed block and kind of get them into shape. I have a tendency to get people on the same dogmatic page, kind of herd them. And I don't think that's the point of the estuary. In a way, that's kind of the opposite of the estuary, right?
yeah. I mean, that's sort of my thought would be. I mean, if I want to know something about basically what you think, I would be like, okay, what do you think? And then you just sort of reply and be like, all right, so this is why I agree with that point, maybe, and this is also why maybe I agree with part of your point, something like that. So I sort of take in and also give back rather than throw and like chisel down or something.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're describing a forum where everybody's kind of on equal footing and we're just give and take and we're discussing things and we're bringing up new ideas and we're trying to explore things. But then, like I said, my conservative tendencies tends to just sort of, sort of give a little back, pushing back to people who have the wrong ideas and try to encourage the good ideas and try to put the bad ideas in bad places, try to give the bad ideas problems. So that's not really the idea of a forum at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think of like what in the physical environment, you have the ocean, you have the freshwater, and there's two tides basically, and so there's always the give and the take of each side. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's sort of, yeah, I think the goal is mostly give and take. I don't want to say that you're, um, yeah, so,
Yeah, the give and take doesn't, just to make my position as clear as possible, the give and take doesn't appeal to me so much. I do want to be there. I really value, just like you value the free flow of information, but the give and take, I kind of think it has to go somewhere. I don't want the give and take to just go on forever, because I do want people to center around, like a center around an organization. I want people to just build an organization with an identity, with a, you know, a hard skin, walls, purpose, the whole thing.
Yeah,
Then
well,
you lose it. You lose what estuary is. Then it just becomes another church. Like the moment you do that, it becomes the walled garden. It's Eden. It's everything within here is this space, and everything outside of it is without. And like then it's gone. It's no longer an estuary.
Yeah, I hear you. I can't really respond to that, except that maybe I don't want an estuary. Maybe I want a church instead.
fair enough.
But those things don't have to be completely in conflict with each other, because as human people, we have maybe need for an estuary, but we have also need for a church, because otherwise, why are there so many churches around and not so many estuaries? So,
Right, we do. We need both, right? Because as humans, we're not just part of a group, we're part of multiple groups. And so we can't just be we have to have the church because the church has its boundaries, right? And it's like, okay, everything within the church is a certain way, and we like that. That's orderly. But we also need the estuary because some of the things that we want to talk about can't be talked about in church because of the structure and the order. So it's like some of these things we want to talk about, we have, is outside of that.
Yeah, and I think also people think that estuary is sort of almost like Paul's version of religion that's not religion, and I I'm just sort of thinking about this because you mentioned it, Richard. I don't think that's the case, mostly because religion that's not religion is it's top down, and it's very, this is like the ecology of practices. That's sort of a term that John uses, and while rather estuary is bottom up, and it's more, we don't really have ecology of practices. We just have this very loose practice of talking to each other, sort of responding, and not saying this is the to-do list in a sense.
You know, you heard me clacking on the keyboard. I guess I wrote that down. I think I really am against the open spaces. I can't see the open spaces as being any kind of use. I mean, the ecumenical. I love being ecumenical. I love ecumenism, but the open spaces. I guess I'm against estuary now. I guess I'm just. It's no other way to say it is like. Well, it's kind of surprising to find myself here.
why you find that surprising?
It's because it seemed like such a great idea to build the estuary, but to hear Charlie's formulation is estuary is a place away from the ordered and the centered and the dogmatic. I don't, just to hear Charlie's formation is like I'm kind of I don't want to move into an estuary. I want to move into a church.
Well,
I think
and
that's no,
I
go
think
ahead,
that
Charlie.
says a lot of. I think that says a lot about where you are, Richard, because I think a lot of us that are moving into estuary already have a church, right?
Yeah. You know a little bit more about me, so you can say that.
Well, I don't mean that to pick at you. I'm just saying I think that's at this point why you're against the idea, right?
But I
Well,
think that's
what does estuary add besides ecumenism? What does estuary add that the church doesn't?
Well,
Discussion of ideas that might not be accepted in a very dogmatic and theological setting.
right.
So, like, I could be totally free to talk about strange ideas that Jung had and stuff like that, where most Christians would, if I brought that up in the church, they'd just be like, "Well, what's going on here, crazy person?"
Yeah, you go tell your priest you want to read the red book and see what he says.
I'm doing
Right?
it anyways.
But doesn't that also indicate that, like what Richard's saying, that estuary is not for everyone? I mean, we shouldn't force everyone to go to a church on estuary.
Yeah, I don't think.
No, absolutely not. There are some people that it's just not going to be for. And, and that's fine.
Yeah.
It really is. If I tried to explain that to some of the elder church members, they'd be like, well, what do I need that for?
Yeah.
Right? Like, they have their system, their life is going good. It's okay, great.
Yeah.
This isn't for you then.
Or they would see it as another opportunity to evangelize. It'd become one of the other. They'd either see it as a tool in their frame, or they'd see no utility in it.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not completely happy with your answer. I think you could do the, if you had a good church, you could do the ecumenical stuff in the church. If you have stupid questions, you can ask the stupid questions about horrible theology and horrible dogma inside the church. It's just that the estuary offers us a vision of a better thing, of a more wider thing, and a thing with better answers, better people, more energy, more connection to the outside. But none of that is really none of that is really the idea of the estuary as a just unshaped space. In a way, you could offer all that inside of a bigger church.
I wouldn't be able to have an ecumenical conversation in my church.
No, you actually can't, because it has to be structured and rigorous and dogmatic. Otherwise, it ceases to be the church, right? Like, when you go in there, you expect that everybody sitting around you has some basic views that you all hold to, because that's what the church body is in that building, right? It's like, I can't walk into a Catholic church and expect them to believe the same way I do. It's just not going to happen. In fact, I can't go up to that priest and have a conversation about, well, a whole host of different things, because that's outside of his wheelhouse, right? Like, and that's fine. We're okay with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same way for me. Like, I wouldn't be able to do the same. I went to a bunch of churches. I mean, if I went to a different church in my town, it wouldn't be the same. Wouldn't be able to have that conversation. Wouldn't be able to have.
Yeah, well, you're talking to like the professional church people whose job depends on them giving the right answers, like Paul might say. Paul might say in his videos, well, I'm a CRC pastor, so I have to be really careful what I say now. And when you're dealing with professional people like that, you can't really bring up all kinds of weird, off-the-wall questions. And in the estuary, you can. But in a way, that's really, I'm not sure that's exactly because there is a church. It's not because you build a church and you push out all the off-wall crazy questions. It's because there's professional people whose livelihood depends on them being a CRC pastor. I hope that makes sense.
Right, but the church has actually done that in the past. Right? That's why we have the schisms, because the church has actually done a good enough job at pushing out the things that would be heretical.
Yeah, and that's important. It's important to take the people that are troublemakers, the people who are just trying to do completely different things than what they should be doing. I mean, you can't do that in a CRC church, and that's a good thing. You know, church it up a little bit and stop all this monkey business. I mean, the church has to push out some of this stuff,
but the ideas don't go away, right?
Yeah,
those
but
ideas don't just leave.
if I'm a deacon in the CRC church, you can still come to me with off the wall questions because I'm not being paid. I don't have any value in my position. I'm not being paid. I can do the ecumenical thing. You can talk to me about politics or something stupid. Last stupid YouTube video you watched. It's really only the professionals that have the job, that have, in Paul's case, he's been a pastor for 30 years. He can't risk his job by giving kind of off the cuff answers to horrible off the wall questions.
I don't think you would give the ecumenical conversation if you were a CRC deacon. I don't think that would happen. I think you would probably stay in your wheelhouse. And same with almost every unprofessional person in that church. They would answer it sort of how they believe. And to have an ecumenical conversation, you have to have someone outside of your wheelhouse, basically.
Right. Because you're going to get the same thing with me. I don't get paid to do it. And you know what? If you come up to me with one of those questions, I would actually say, hey, if you want to have this conversation, let's have it not inside the building. You want to come over and have dinner? Come over and have dinner and we'll talk about it. Right? But I'm not going to have that conversation within the walled garden. It's just not going to happen.
And you would still answer it within your frame of reference.
Right. I would still answer it within my frame of reference. Sure.
Well,
Whereas building this relationship with you, if somebody asked me, if somebody came to the church and said, hey, actually, I've been thinking about X, Y, or Z, and it turns out that that's a Catholic doctrine, I would say, I don't have the answer, but I can get you the answer because I know some people that do know. Right. And I could ask you, or I could ask Eric, Deacon Eric, or I could, Father Eric. Forgive me. But I could ask plenty of different people, right?
Yeah.
It's like, or if somebody had a question about Orthodox stuff, I could be like, I don't have the answer, but I know somebody that does.
Yeah.
And that's just another layer to estuary is if we can have these ecumenical discussions, then when somebody comes in with those questions, you would hope that the group is diverse enough that somebody there knows. And that's why these discussions are good to have.
So you're saying that I come up, I walk into your church, and after church I grab your arm, grab your shirt, and I say, hey, I got this weird off the ball question. So you're telling me you would have to leave the church to answer my question?
Out of respect for the church, yes, I would. I would absolutely do that.
Or you would answer it within your wheelhouse of the wall garden. You wouldn't be able to give you wouldn't be able to give sort of I guess if you want to think of it as stages, you have the walled garden, then you have like a little bit outside, which is maybe your personal thought. You wouldn't really be able to potentially give all of your personal thought, and then you wouldn't be able to give like the full-on ecumenical, or I don't know. You wouldn't be able to give like what would be heretical in the Baptist church thought. You would maybe be able to give the personal thoughts outside of the walled garden. And then, like, if let's say you had to answer the question inside the church, you would give the church question.
Right. Right. So what you're going to get if you ask me inside the building is you're going to get a straight up Baptist doctrine answer. You're going to get an answer that a pastor would give you. And that's just I don't even want to say unfortunately, because it's not unfortunate. That's how it is. So look at it as right. Look at it as a Jew. Okay, let's take the Jewish temple as symbolism for this, right? So at the temple, there was the synagogue area where they held court, but it's also where teachings would happen, right? So they would perform normal synagogue services within the inner temple. And then also there's the Holy of Holies, but we don't have to get into that part. And then outside of that is what's known as the temple's outer court. So when we approach Jesus one time and he's, let's see, this is in John 8. He's teaching to people, but he's teaching to them in the outer court. Now, this is Jesus we're talking about, so he would have given the same message inside the temple as within the outer court, but he's teaching them in the outer court. And why is that? Because he's giving them answers that they can't find in the scrolls that are within the temple, right? That's how I treat it. So, like, if you're going to ask me some weird off-the-wall question, I'm going to give you the straight-across church answer that you can find right there inside that building. You can ask any of the other two pastors or the deacons, right? And they're going to give you that answer. Now, if you want to know how I feel about it, then come over to my house for dinner and we'll have a different conversation than what I'm going to have with you inside the church. And that's just a respect of boundaries.
That's also the importance of physical space.
Right.
The constrictive, and also you can have the opposite of constrictive, and have a very open space, depending on
right.
That's just like the general, I guess, psychological aspect of the physical space that you're in.
Right. And look, we all do it. If you would have went to, when Jordan Peterson was still around, if you would have went to one of his lectures, do you think he's going to parrot Sam Adams in his lectures? Or not Sam Adams. God, I keep making that mistake. Is he going to parrot Sam Harris in one of his lectures? Yes or no? Well, no. Right?
Paul made the same mistake in one of his videos too.
But
I can't remember what it was, but he said instead of Sam Harris, he said Sam Adams. I think it was Stoa.
Oh yeah, that's right. But if you ask him a question outside of that lecture, you might get a different answer than what he would have said inside that lecture hall. And that's not to say anything bad about Jordan Peterson. It was just, this is a space where I'm giving a lecture, right? And I'm going to tell you the answer within this framework of this lecture that I'm giving. And you're not going to get a different answer. You ask me, you catch me on the street a week later and ask me that same question, and you might get a different answer.
Yeah. And that's sort of just like also I'm gonna continue with that example. He would just be in a different mindset. So he's already talked. I mean, if we're going off of his framework of how he did lectures, he's already lectured on a specific subject for a bunch of hours. So he's going to have different thoughts in his head because he's thought about something, and he's going to try and connect your question to generally what he's thought about for these past couple hours or so.
Right. But that's why the ecumenical discussions are so important for, I would really say, especially for people like me and Pastor Paul, right? Because we can get stuck in an echo chamber where, you know, we give the sermons and we hear the questions, but the questions are always couched from people who might have a question about the sermon that we just gave, and then we're just reverberating an answer that's based on our tradition, right? But and he gets into, that's why he likes to talk to randos. And that's why I love the idea of estuary, because it's like, if I can have these conversations with other people that are outside of my church family, I'm going to get way more from it.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to have that freedom to express ideas that are not pure doctrine.
Yeah.
So I can have a 2-hour conversation with, right. I can have a 2-hour conversation with Sam Adams. I did get his name right this time. And we can talk about Unitarian stuff, and we can talk about how I probably align more with Unitarian than Trinitarian. And we can talk about why. Some of the things I said to him in that conversation, I'll be quite honest, and some of the things that I've said to him before, I could not go to the Southern Baptist Convention and say those and not get a sideways look.
So you're telling me that when you're inside I'm sorry if you're, I want to put a smile on your face, and this is going to be a difficult question, so it's not going to be. Hopefully this will put a little fork in your theory. So when you go to the Southern Baptist conventions and you're inside the church that should be the closest to you, the most welcoming, you're inside the Southern Baptist convention and you're inside a whole group of friends, that's when you have to be the most guarded and the most careful about what you say. Isn't that kind of backwards?
Well, yes, and also no, because I have to respect the fact that we have a doctrine that we attend to, right? And I am 95% in agreement with the Southern Baptist, and that's why I am one. So I have to respect the fact that some of those things that I think are not within pure doctrine. So I'm not going to bring them up and cause a fracturing. I just won't do that. And it's just a respect thing. I guard it on purpose, because it's not like I'm silencing myself, because I'll have that discussion with anybody else. But in that space, I'm not going to have that discussion.
Yeah, because I'd say most people would, I think the denomination that people choose is the denomination that hopefully someone agrees with the most. So like for you, you said 90%, 95%. I mean, I haven't thought about all of the little niche things that like I might disagree or agree with, but I wouldn't say that. You know, there's definitely, it's hard to say, but like I think you're onto something that is important, because if everyone thought about it, there'd probably be something that maybe there's a doctrine that someone's uncomfortable with. While they might still believe it, there's always going to be maybe some internal conflict about it that they have to work through.
And inside the building is not the place to try to work through that. It is my personal opinion. and I know that sounds backwards because we're all into let's not self-censor and which, I agree, don't self-censor, but that doesn't mean that you can't make a decision of this is not the time and the place to bring this up.
Yeah.
There's a time and a place for it. And you want to take it to the political level after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, it's not the time and the place to have the discussion about how I disagreed with almost every single opinion that she put out. It's not the time and the space for that. It's just not. Give it some time. I'm willing to have that discussion. But right afterwards, not going to do it.
Yep. Like, I'm sure if I went through a catechism, a Catholic catechism, there'd be definitely some points that I'm like, wow, that's interesting. I've never really thought about it, but I'm going to ascribe to it still. Maybe it still makes me uncomfortable, but the point for me is, do I agree with maybe, the larger, you sort of have to weight what you agree with in a sense. So like, I agree with all of the larger doctrinal points. There might be like one little point or something that I'm like, oh, that I'm gonna have to think about that one. I'm gonna have to see what I, just how I react and how I emotionally feel about it, and then maybe talk to the priest about it. Be like, hey, like, where does this sort of come from, and just sort of dig into it. And I think that's part of it.
I really like the idea of inside versus outside, because outside the Southern Baptist Church, you have to be consistent, you have to be virtuous, you have to be on focus, you have to be compatible with the church's message. But it sounds like the inside isn't ecumenical, and you're not getting the kind of inside the Baptist Church. You're not getting the kind of deeper, the kind of what do you call it? Heterodox. You're not getting the estuary stuff.
Yeah.
So
you're not going to get like the second circle. You're going to get
you shouldn't.
the first circle, and,
and
you're never going to get the third circle.
You lost me with the circles, but
so first one I'm going to say is the church. Second one is personal views. Third one is ecumenical and points that I wouldn't know about. Like, I don't know all the fasting rules for Orthodox during Lent.
What if you reverse the order, though? What if you had the off the wall inside the church, even though the outside the church it was completely consistent?
It wouldn't be a church then, because you would.
Are you sure?
Yeah, because you would have too many jumbled opinions. There would be people wouldn't be able to totally agree. I mean, people would be like, when are we going to have liturgy? Like, and how are we going to order it? And, are we going to have Eucharist? Like,
maybe it's just that people don't know the difference between outside and inside anymore, because you can't have this discussion inside the church because people aren't keeping track of what's outside and inside the church. Like, if people can't say, oh, this is church doctrine, but hey, we're just going to discuss this inside the church, but we're still going to present the united exterior to the world. So we've just kind of lost the notion of inside, and we're going to have ecumenical stuff inside. I think, I mean, you're Catholic. I mean, you know that the bishops high up in the Catholic Church, they deal with difficult questions all the time. They have ecumenical discussions all the time, stuff that they don't want or they can't have the Pope saying. The Catholic Church has that outside and inside understanding. Oh, I can see you're very puzzled.
No, I just don't think I agree with that. I think well, I wouldn't say the bishops on the regular talk to rabbis. I think, and I think they are generally going to, well, they're of course going to agree with all of the things that are said in the catechism. They're going to uphold them, and yeah, I don't, I just don't think that's correct. A correct categorization.
Really, I think the bishops kind of have to talk about the outside world inside the.
They do,
too.
but I think I'm I don't think I'm following you. Maybe, but yeah, they're not going to have, in a sense, the third circle isn't something that you can.
If you walk in there and you talk to and you talk to a priest, he's not going, and you ask him a question about something that's, say, Baptist doctrine that you've learned, he's going to give you an answer that is couched within the frame of Catholicism. That's all there is to it. Now, let's say you catch him somewhere outside of that, he may give you a different answer depending on who the priest is. Or he may say, well, I don't really have a good answer to that, but here's someone who does.
Well, just if two bishops, or what's below a bishop?
Just a priest.
Yeah, or two priests. They're comfortable with each other. They trust each other. They would have the kind of ecumenical conversations and heterodox conversations because they trust each other. But that, and I'm not sure that would be outside the church. I think that would be inside the church, just because I don't think that would be automatically put them in the estuary. I think they would be inside the church working out difficult problems.
That would be personal. It would be. I don't think.
Yeah,
It would
that's
be
not
really
an ecumenical
because
discussion. They're
it
both
wouldn't
of the
really
same
be.
faith.
Yeah,
If they're both of the same faith, you take the ecumenical out of the equation altogether, and they're just talking about whatever issue it is.
yeah. It
An
still would.
ecumenical discussion is between me and Andrew, who are on different sides. We're both couched within Christianity, but we're on different doctrinal sides. So
Yeah, but
he and I,
you can have that discussion because you have a personal relationship. But if someone else walks in the room, you would kind of go into outside mode, and start kind of choosing your words more carefully and trying to make sure that it what you say is consistent with the outside face of the church, even just because someone walks into the room. But if someone's not there, you could have that kind of interior discussion.
I don't think I would change too much of what I'm saying. I'd probably still keep. Um, I would just preface some of my potentially heterodox opinions with, this is my personal opinion. This might not be, this isn't something I know incredibly well, and maybe this is a bit heterodox in the context of the Catholic Church.
I would say if you ask me a straight on question about it, yes, I'm going to give you both. I'm going to give you the doctrine answer, and I'm going to give you how I feel about it. So you're going to get both from me, whether you just walked into this conversation or not. If you're not asking me a question about it, then Andrew and I are going to continue to have the conversation, and you can just listen in or ask questions. But, I'm going to give a balanced answer to an outsider. unless I'm within the walled garden, then I'm going to give just the doctrine answer.
But I'm thinking if you are outside in the estuary and you just give the book answer, what's the meaning of it? I'm a little bit. I think Richard has a good point about what's inside and outside. I'm a little bit confused now about what the difference is. But maybe there's something more saying about me than about the conversation.
Just to restate the point, like outside the Baptist Church, they have a consistent doctrinal view. They answer all the questions the same way. And that's just to present themselves as a complete Christian church. But inside the church, you develop deeper relationships, and you might be able to handle some of these weird questions that you might have to go outside the church doctrine for. Just because inside the church you have deeper relationships and you have better trust, and inside the so it's just putting on a face for the church, just for the purpose of simplifying it to the outside world. But inside the church, you're dealing with actual people, actual deep questions, actual personal doubts, and just looking for more answers, because inside the church you have different kinds of relationships. So outside the church, you don't have relationships with just random people walking up and looking for answers. But inside the church, you have friends, contacts, sources of information and data. You have dogma, understanding, and tradition. And also inside the church, well,
So
there's inside the church, and then there's inside your relationships.
Yeah, but I'm here to tell you, you actually won't find those discussions even inside the relationships inside the church, because people think a whole lot of different things, and they don't want to be seen as one of the outsiders. So
but
if you catch me outside of the building, you're going to get two. If you ask me a question, you're going to get two answers. You're going to get a doctrine answer, and you're going to get how I feel about it answer. And those are probably going to vary unless it's within that 95% of this is what doctrine says and this is what I wholeheartedly believe. But if I have some other thoughts on it, you're going to get that too.
Yeah, it comes back again sort of to physical space.
Right, and when I'm talking about space, that's what like a physical space, like that's what you're going to get, right?
Well, it's Thursday, and I hope everybody has a great Thursday. Hope everybody has a great day, man.
All right. Have a good one, Richard.
See you later.
Yeah.
thanks. Here around.
Aloha.
Thank you, sir. And I'm just saying that too. Just saying that because I hope you have a great day. I'm not trying to close the conversation down.
No.
Yeah, that's fine.
No worries. Have a good one.
So, yeah, I do have to get off here pretty quick because I got to get to work.
Yeah. All right. I think I'm